Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 2 of the craft workshop. And tonight I'm going to talk about self care and managing your emotions. But first, I want to introduce myself. My name is Heather Ross, and my daughter Helena struggled with abusing substances from the time that she was 12 years old until she passed away last year at the age of 21 from fentanyl poisoning. So I've been through it all. Including several months of sobriety last year, which was just a wonderful experience. And I'm grateful that we had that together. But my life has been forever changed by her addiction. And that's why I do this work to help other parents. So I do that by hosting the Living with Addiction podcast. And I also have a 12-week program where I work with parents one on one, coaching them. So if you want to know more about that or anything else, you can go to my website at heatherrosscoaching.com. So let me go to the next slide. And I want to talk about putting your own oxygen mask on first and self care because it just seems like it's something that should be obvious. But I know myself, it was like the first thing that I gave up when my daughter's addiction started, and probably, hadn't been the greatest before that anyway. And instinctually, we try to put our kids' oxygen mask on them first. And we end up risking both of our safety. I mean, there's a reason that they make that announcement on an airplane every time you fly that you have to put your own oxygen mask on first because it's just our instinct to do it the other way around. And if we run out of oxygen, like we can't help ourselves or anybody else. So if you're holding your breath, trying to put your kid's oxygen mask on them, which I was doing with my daughter, and she was fighting me the whole way, then, we just run out of the energy that we need to stay in this, this is addiction is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Like it is something that we will have to deal with long term. So we have to train for that. And part of the training is taking care of our physical and mental health. I mean, if you think about you want your child to take care of themselves, then we need to lead by example and take care of ourselves as well. And if your child is struggling to find balance and regulate, whether you realize it or not, they're looking to you to bring that stability to the relationship. And if you aren't taking care of yourself, then there's no way that you can bring that stability to the relationship that they're looking for. So we have to be able to regulate ourselves as well. And when my daughter's addiction started, my resilience muscle was practically non existent. It took a lot of self care and a lot of work to build that muscle. And I had to make that a priority before I could help my daughter. I just wasn't able to be there for her the way that I wanted to when I was not eating right, not exercising. My hair was falling out. I wasn't sleeping. So, it was hard for me to come up with good solutions to things. I was just a mess. And I had to really start taking care of myself so that I could pave the way for her to take care of herself the way I wanted her to. So I made this self-care scale just for an example and a way to think about like, where are you with your self-care? One being like, what is self-care? I'm not even on the list. Five being, I've got pretty good habits, but I want to do better. And 10 being like, you've got it down. You're the self-care guru. And on pages 31 through 34 of the 20-minute guide, there's some exercises called This Is Really Stressful, and that's about making self care goals. And I really recommend taking the time to do those exercises. If you're like me, your brain's always telling you this won't work, it's not worth my time. But how much time are you losing because you can't focus or get anything done because you're exhausted? So, having the self care and the resilience that you need is actually going to give you back time. And if you think about how, like, our kids are not going to get sober without working at it, right? It's not just going to happen. And the same thing is, true for us. self-care and good physical and emotional health isn't going to just happen for us. We have to spend time on it. We have to give it, our attention. We have to put effort there. We have to be really intentional to create those results for ourselves. Go on to the next slide. So now I want to talk about managing your emotions. And that's one of the reasons that it's so important to take care of ourselves, right? Like, I know if I'm not taking care of myself, then, if I'm overly tired, then I just feel so much more emotional. And when I say emotional, like more likely to cry, have a harder time thinking through things. So, managing your emotions and self care really go hand in hand. But last week, I talked about how important it is for us to be able to tolerate our discomfort about our kids' discomfort. And the best way for us to do that is to get comfortable with our own emotions. So when we get comfortable with our own feelings, then we can not only tolerate our kids' emotions, but we're able to support them through their own emotions as well. And it's really important to acknowledge that our feelings are normal. Like, what we're going through is very difficult. None of us were born knowing how to do this. And so, of course, we're taking the time to learn these things, but just acknowledging that what everybody's going through, what you're going through, the rest of your family, your child that's struggling with addiction, it's just difficult for everybody. So we have to be able to create awareness of our feelings so that we can respond to them rather than reacting to them. So responding takes you understanding what's going on under the surface. So if you didn't already know this, I just want to explain that our thoughts create our feelings. So we have a thought, whether you realize it or not, it could be a subconscious thought. And that thought is what releases the chemicals in our body that we feel as an emotion. So our feelings actually come from our thoughts. They don't come from the circumstance. You might think it comes from the circumstance of your child abusing substances, but it actually comes from what you think about them abusing substances. So that's really important to know. So for me, I was losing my temper a lot. And a lot of times what I was thinking just before that were things like, you don't respect me. This is never going to end. You're never going to change. It's always going to be this way. If I was a better mother, this wouldn't be happening. All of these thoughts were overwhelming me. And those thoughts were creating the feeling, and they didn't serve me. And that's why I never really liked how I showed up. So once I learned that and really understood that it wasn't my daughter's addiction that was the problem, it was the way I was thinking about it that was making it more difficult for me. I also learned to question those thoughts. So you have to go back and ask yourself, like, what you were thinking just before this really strong emotion occurred in you. And it's not easy to do initially. It takes a little practice, so don't expect it to be easy, because we're not always thinking about what we're thinking about. It's another skill that you have to build, but it'll create awareness that gives you a choice. And it gives you a choice how you want to respond to the circumstance of what's happening with your child. You get to choose to be really intentional. You can choose thoughts that serve you, thoughts that create feelings like love and compassion and courage. And once you're able to do that, then you get to really like how you show up when you're dealing with your child's addiction. Because when you're constantly confronting them, that leads to a lot of resistance. I tried that with my daughter, and she just resisted me every step of the way. And then, there's a couple of questions on the slide, like, how would you want to be treated? And would you respond well to the way you've been acting? I know that the way I was approaching things in the beginning is not how I would want somebody to approach it if I was going through a difficult time. And I would not have responded well to the way I was showing up with my daughter. So I think those are great questions to ask yourself. And then the last thing I want to talk about is reacting with compassion and a calm approach. It might feel like you're doing something wrong or that you're giving up, but I want you to ask yourself if what you've been doing has been working. For me, the yelling, like I just said, the confronting and blaming did not fix anything. It just made things worse. And that's what I hear from most parents that, um, in my case, it just made my daughter really kind of hate me for a long time. She didn't trust me. She constantly ran away. We were always fighting. And, at the time, my ex-husband put an enormous amount of pressure on me to control the situation. He just wanted me to fix it. He wanted me to make her respect me. And so I came at it with so much force because I was just feeling all this pressure. And that force was like anger and punishment. And it didn't work. It just caused years of damage in our relationship that then I had to work even harder to repair that damage on top of what we were dealing with the addiction, which is what happens in a lot of cases because we just don't know how to show up. We get overwhelmed and then we get angry. So even though it might feel wrong or go against all of your instincts or the advice that you're getting, it's worth it to take this completely different approach. Just give it a try to see, if it does work, if things do get better, give it a little bit of time. Things don't change overnight. Like we have to be consistent when we try something new, but it's definitely worth taking the time to also do the managing your emotions worksheet in the 20-minute guide, because we have the same things come up over and over again when we're dealing with addiction. Like we end up fighting with our kids about the same stuff. So write those situations down and then write down what you want your intentional response to be. Do that when you're calm, because when emotions are high, our ability to think and problem solve is low. So you want to do that when you're in a good place to do it. You write it down so that you can refer to it when your brain shuts off because you're so angry about what happened. You can excuse yourself for a minute and read what you wrote and then respond that way. It's really a great way to reprogram your brain and have things written down so that you can refer to it when you need them. And then again, if things don't work out like you want them to, and they won't all of the time because we're human, we make mistakes. So go back and ask yourself like what you were thinking, name the emotion. That's really important. You've got to get a good emotional vocabulary, start understanding what those feelings feel like in your body so that you can see them as signals so that you can start really measuring how you respond instead of react. And think of this like when you're resisting your kids' emotions or resisting your own emotions. I did that too. It's like resisting breathing. Like we have to breathe to live. Feeling emotions is part of the human experience. So imagine if you were all the time like, oh my gosh, I know I'm going to have to breathe again. And you're just holding your breath, waiting for the next time. Like it would be so exhausting and stressful, right? And that's the same thing when you're just resisting your emotions all the time. And our kids, again, like they're using substances to help them cope with their emotions. So it's really important that you learn how to cope with your emotions and then you're able to walk them through that and help them with that. So that's all I have for today's session on self-care and managing your emotions. And I will see you in week 3.